open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And I'm Jim Waters with this Tuesday edition of Kentucky's Voice. We are unbridled, unapologetic, and conservative here each weekday, 11 to noon. You're listening to this live on the radio on 970 WGTK, and you can also catch us on television this afternoon at 12:30, and then later on at 4 and 7 o'clock, and we're streaming live as well on all major social media platforms. You're a part of Kentucky's Voice. We call this Kentucky's Voice, but it's a collection of voices, including the voices of conservatives in our listening area and our viewing area and across this state. This is the media home for Kentucky conservatives. And you can be a part of this in a couple of important ways that I want to tell you about in the beginning of this show. Share with us your thoughts and opinions and ideas on the topics that we're covering and those you would like to see us cover on Kentucky's Voice. You can do that on our Kentucky's Voice text line at 502-571-0970. Also, you can support this work. It is a listener-supported effort, and you can give us some help. Stand by us as Kentucky's Voice through financial contributions. You can do that as a one-time or a recurring monthly gift at 502-571-0970, or you can find us and donate online at kyvoice.org. And then finally, you can let others know about this media project, especially those who say they're tired of corporate media as usual and they want something different, something true, something consistent, something conservative. How about Kentucky's Voice? So thanks for joining us today. And how about that Kentucky Derby winner, Golden Tempo, trailing from behind. And after trailing from the very last position, at one point, he came all the way back to win. If we can see him there, if we have that clip, let's show him. Love what Sherry DeVoe, his trainer, and the first female trainer to win the Kentucky Derby, said he just doesn't have a lot of speed, but he has a lot of stamina. And towards the end of the race, he does have, we call it, quick turn of foot, so he can make up a lot of ground. She added, but just as in the early stages, he likes to hang out behind and let them all do the hard work, and then he can just finish up and beat them all. Isn't that great? He just wants to hang out, let them do all the hard work, and then he can just beat them all. Well, speaking of races, how about the political races going on right now here in Kentucky? Last week, President Trump had a meeting at which he convinced businessman Nate Morris to drop out of the race for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Senator Mitch McConnell, who had held the seat for 41 years. Then Trump endorsed Congressman Andy Barr, who had held a 6 to 7 point lead over former Attorney General Daniel Cameron in the last poll, which was done over a month ago. So we really haven't had any recent polling yet. Conservative talk show host Scott Jennings claims that Trump's endorsement will give Congressman Barr a comfortable lead and win. But a former Attorney General Daniel Cameron, the other major candidate, as we said, is saying not so fast. We're going to have reaction from the candidates and from the talking heads coming up next on that. And also, Debbie Robbins was at a press conference held by Daniel Cameron today at the state Republican Party headquarters, and we're going to hear from her also in our first segment coming up. And also, we're going to take a closer look at that lone constitutional amendment that passed during the 2026 session of the Kentucky General Assembly, which would limit the ability of governors to pardon in and around an election time. And also, Senator Rand Paul has introduced a constitutional amendment limiting birthright citizenship to what he says were the founders' intentions. This after a lot of angst among conservatives that the U.S. Supreme Court won't do the limiting. And this is based on questions and the responses of Supreme Court justices during the hearing on the birthright citizenship executive order issued by President Trump. Will it become law, or will it become part of our Constitution? And we'll talk about that coming up as well. Also, Andy Beshear's lieutenant governor has announced a run for the top seat. This and more. We take your text on the Kentucky Voice text line at 502-571-0970. That is the Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. Stay with us. More to come. Don't go away.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Thanks for staying with us today on this Tuesday edition of Kentucky's Voice. And we are exactly 2 weeks away from the primary election on May 19th. And today is also a deadline. Today is the final day to submit a request for an absentee ballot. So if you're not going to be able to vote in the regularly scheduled opportunities to vote, you need to get an online absentee ballot. That request portal closes today. If you know you'll not be able to vote in person on Election Day, then you can request this mail-in absentee ballot through the portal on the Secretary of State's website. You must have an excuse that's recognized under Kentucky state law, such as you may be a college student who's away from home or temporarily living outside the state. You might be in other situations that do fit the qualifications for being able to vote absentee. Once you've received your mail-in ballot, it must be returned to your county clerk's office where you reside by 6 p.m. local time on Election Day, May 19th. Dropbox locations are available on the Kentucky State Board of Elections website as well. Now, starting tomorrow, Wednesday, May 6th, excused in-person early voting begins across the state. That period will run for a week through May 13th. You'll have a week for excused in-person early voting. And during these days, you must have a valid state-recognized reason for not voting on Election Day or during the regular no-excuse early voting period. So for a full list of all excused in-person voting locations, look at the Kentucky State Board of Elections website. It'll give you all that information there. Kentucky voters will be deciding several key races on the May 19th ballot, including nominees for the U.S. Senate and U.S. House congressional seats from each party. The latest in these races is it's been a barn burner of a week, that's for sure. On Friday, President Trump endorsed Andy Barr, Congressman Andy Barr, the front runner in the campaign to determine the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Mitch McConnell. Show that Trump post there. He said, "I know Andy well, and he is always a vote we can count on because he knows what it takes to get things done and make America great again," Trump wrote on his Truth Social site. Trump's endorsement was posted 16 minutes after he asked the other major candidate in the race, Nate Morris, to drop out. And as for Congressman Barr, reporters caught up with him at the Kentucky Derby, where he commented on getting Trump's endorsement. Play that clip.
I am a proven winner, and we can't take a risk with this seat. We need to win. I thanked the president on the phone, and I told him that I was honored to be a persistent and consistent supporter of his in the U.S. House, and that I will be his #1 champion in the Senate as well. We would welcome Daniel Cameron's support as well.
But the Cameron campaign is saying not so fast. Daniel Cameron held a press conference today in Frankfurt, and joining us now is Debbie Robbins, another host here on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for taking a few minutes, Debbie, there at the headquarters.
Oh my goodness,
and I know you're standing.
Hi,
I see you're standing in front of the Daniel Cameron sign there. Tell us what happened today. I know Daniel Cameron announced that he's not only staying in the race, but he's going to do a statewide tour of Kentucky.
He
is in it to win it.
He's in the lead, Jim. He's in the lead in every single poll except for one that he said it was only.
We're not going to talk. Let's talk about what happened today.
Well, we are here today at the Republican Party headquarters for Louisville. That's where we are. It wasn't in Frankfurt. And I got an email last night finding out about this. Daniel came in here strong and mighty, family man with Mackenzie by his side. She introduced him, had 2 of their 3 children with them. He made it very clear. There is no way this man is out of this race. He doesn't care who endorsed his opponent. And he is more than willing to stand for the people of Kentucky. He just had an outstanding speech as usual, said if there's a place for you in the Daniel Cameron camp, whether you're a constitutionalist, a Trump supporter, whatever, constitutionalist. Lance is also here with us.
Yes.
And I was so happy to see him come in as well.
Yeah.
And,
is he there with you right now?
Well, he's in the other room, so we wouldn't have any tech issues.
Okay.
So here we go.
Well, hey, Debbie, I know the last official poll was over a month ago, so we haven't had any polling for about a month, and so it's going to be interesting to see how this endorsement affects the race. And I think this is going to be a 2-man race. It's going to be pretty exciting to the finish. Lance, what are your thoughts about what you heard today?
Hey, Jim.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Jim, I think. Oh. Is that working? All right. Sorry, technical issues. So yeah, I thought that he actually started prosecuting the case that we knew this race was going to come down to Barr or Cameron really from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Morris's campaign really never caught on. And, I have some appreciation for Nate Morris. I expect that a lot of his followers are going to wind up in the Cameron camp. But this simplified the race. It's either going to be Barr or it's going to be Cameron. And I think either one of those 2 people I'm going to support in the general. I think they're going to defeat the socialists that are going to wind up coming out of the Democratic Party for the general election. But I personally, and I think Debbie also, we're in the Cameron camp. I think he's a legitimate conservative. And Andy Barr has just, I think the biggest message to take home from our viewers is if you're upset with the way that Washington is working, why would we take someone who has been part of everything that's wrong with Washington, the special interests, the machine politics and the politics of personal destruction? Why would we bring them back and put them in a higher position, in the Senate position?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Debbie,
reporters asked Daniel to describe.
Hey, Debbie,
Yes.
Lance makes a great point there about why would you, and that's a strike against Barr, how long he's been in office, and that's come up. That's also an issue with the person that they're seeking to replace. I mean, Mitch McConnell has been there 41 years. That's a long time.
Well, Jim, the other reporters asked him, questions in regard to that. How would he be different or alike with McConnell? But his main thing about Andy Barr, I thought he summed it up in one sentence. He said, Andy goes along to get along. And Daniel is a firm person who says, I represent the voices of Kentuckians, period, the end. And everyone knows his moral standing, his Christian faith. He's the only candidate I know of, Jim, in my lifetime who boldly proclaims his Christian faith. And since Kentucky's Voice is Christian conservative.
That's right.
Listen, Christians. Listen, people that go into church out there.
Yeah, let me. I know because you're short on time here, but Lance, let me ask you. Oh, he is.
No.
Well, Debbie, I'll ask.
Is he back?
Is he back?
Hello.
Okay, there he is.
Yeah,
I'll ask you both this, and I'll let Lance start out, and then Debbie, if you want to respond as well, it'd be great.
Yeah.
But here's the question: is at one time, Cameron and McConnell were pretty tight, and of course, Trump had endorsed Daniel Cameron in the past. My understanding is that they had a bit of a falling out when Daniel decided to get into this race. That was part of the issue, and that McConnell really wanted to control, as always, what happened in this race. Lance, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's possible. I think that it actually might have tied into Daniel deciding to run for governor. There was a lot of scuttlebutt that there were some other people that were interested in running for governor, maybe some high-profile donors within the Republican Party that were interested in running for that spot. And when Daniel moved into that, he became the front runner, and he obviously won the primary election statewide pretty handily. And so I think he basically didn't follow whatever the permission structure was from that machine to run for governor. And then I don't know all the dynamics. I don't have inside information into the conversations between McConnell and Daniel, but he's certainly running his own campaign as his own man. And that actually, he supports the Trump agenda, but I don't expect that he's going to go in and just be a thoughtless rubber stamp for anything that happens. He's going to have a real voice that's concerned about what's happening in Kentucky and whether or not these policies are good for Kentucky, rather than just whatever leadership tells him to vote for.
He's not going to go along to get
kind
along.
of like another congressman we know about, right?
That's right. And, yeah, that's right. But I think on all those cases, I want somebody that's interested in promoting Kentucky's interests, whether or not it's good for California, for example. Right. So we don't have to all think as one block. We need to have somebody fighting for us as Kentucky voters up there.
And
Deb, I use this. I'm sorry to interrupt. I use this analogy a lot that, I believe Daniel has grown into become his own man. I think about people like Senator Dan Quayle in the past, Sarah Palin, how they fell prey to those that were, in leadership and they wanted to follow them instead of doing what they knew worked. Daniel is a man of the people. He's loved in this state. He has built a tremendous amount of support, and he's going to barnstorm the state for the next 10 days. And when you all see his press conference today, you will see he does not stand down. And he wants to be on the farm committee. What I always say, he's an authentic person. He's authentic and is a leader, a natural born authentic leader. Yeah, if you don't have authenticity, you're not going to make it.
So,
in my opinion,
Debbie, let me ask a question here.
Sure.
So, you mentioned too his faith, and that's definitely a really important part of his campaign. He's made this really his ads. His latest ad is really focused on that, and I think that's and it's genuine. It doesn't come off as just. It doesn't come off as something, being forced, right? In other words, it's a very genuine, and I think that's the word you used earlier, and Lance has us too. But just, we have about 30 seconds. Final thoughts.
To me, faith, if we are a Christian, our station, what we're doing, Christian conservative, to me, if you are not a Christ-centered human, you have no business doing this. You've got to be focused, and we all should be driven by our Christian faith. And I believe Daniel Cameron is that man. Yeah. And that will pervade in every leadership position that he does, which is a good thing.
Debbie Robbins and Lance Pearson from the Capitol, thank you all for joining us here today, calling in, and we appreciate that at the last minute. And we appreciate you staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice. Exciting days in Kentucky politics. We'll have more coming up after this break. Don't you dare go away. Kentucky's Voice.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And back on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for staying with us today. A lot going on in our political sphere here in Kentucky. And of course, the big news was Donald Trump's endorsement of Congressman Andy Barr for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by longtime Senator and former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And there's been quite a bit of reaction about this. And of course, right before that, Trump posted that he had asked Nate Morris to step out of this race and offered him an ambassadorship. We're not sure where that's going to be yet, what country that is or what that's going to look like. But it was, I think, as much about thinning out the ranks here in this race as it was anything in the future. Certainly, we've also heard discussion about a future for Daniel Cameron related to Donald Trump in terms of a possible Supreme Court nominee. And so Kentucky is definitely at the center of a lot going on. And as for Barr, we showed you his reaction to Trump's endorsement in the last segment. And as I said, he's been the front runner. Also in the futures markets, they are now indicating and have been indicating all along that he also is the strong front runner. Now, again, this was the last official poll that we had was an Emerson Fox 56 poll on April 2nd, which was more than a month ago. And it had Congressman Barr solidly in the lead, 28%, with former Attorney General Daniel Cameron at 21%, and Nate Morris at 15%. Nate Morris, despite funding his own campaign, despite palling around with Donald Trump Jr., and really being close to a lot of folks in the administration, never really got traction in terms of getting into second place in any of the polling that has been done. Now, it will be interesting to see what will be the impact and the fallout from Trump's endorsement of Andy Barr. You heard Lance Pearson, who hosts this program on Mondays and who's the head of the head of the Louisville Tea Party and Kentuckians for Freedom, or involved with Kentuckians for Freedom, but talked about, he thinks and he's predicting that many of the folks that were supporting Morris will come over and support Daniel Cameron in this race. The other thing that we have noticed about all the polling that's been done here is the large number of undecideds in this race. And I think that's a testament to the quality of the candidates. I think all three of these guys, and I know there will be MAGA folks who may disagree. There will be others who look at Congressman Barr as establishment. And I think Lance made a valid point that Congressman Barr has been in Washington, I believe, for 16 years as a congressman. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. I mean, here's a guy who the Democrats tried to gerrymander out of Congress. They tried to redraw his district with the express intent of getting him out of Congress. And he's won every race that he's had. He's won re-election now several times. And some of those have been pretty tough races and pretty tough political fights that he's had to fight. And he's also had to reach out and get Democrats to vote for him in the district he's in, or he wouldn't be able to win, at least in the beginning of his tenure. It was that way. Not so much now, because the Republican registrations have greatly increased. And for the first time in history, as you know, the Republican registrations outstripped the Democratic registrations in our state. But that's not the way it was when Barr took office. When Barr took office 16 years ago, Democrats outnumbered Republicans by more than 2-1. And now, with the Republican registrations outnumbering Democrats, that all has changed. But at that time, in order to win, he had to reach out and reach across the aisle. And for some people, that immediately and automatically brands him as establishment and not MAGA. However, if you look at his voting record, Congressman Barr has been very strong on pro-Trump votes, and especially on those policies that Trump most wanted. And I think that's where you see the dichotomy between Andy Barr and Thomas Massie. At one time, Trump endorsed Thomas Massie, and of course now they're mortal political enemies. Massie and Trump are, but Barr has taken a different approach and has really been aboard, and in fact came out and endorsed Ed Gallrein, who is Congressman Thomas Massie's opponent in this race, who Donald Trump not only endorsed but really recruited to run against Thomas Massie. So my prediction is that some of Trump's endorsements will result in big wins. Some probably won't. Congressman Massie is probably going to win, but as we said previously, not by as much as he would have won without the endorsement of President Trump by his opponent, Ed Gallrein. Now, what are some other folks saying about this endorsement of Congressman Andy Barr? CNN analyst and Kentucky-based Republican strategist Scott Jennings predicted that Trump's endorsement will mean a jump in the polls for Barr and a comfortable win for Barr over Cameron. So he's saying that the voters who were supporting Morris will largely come over to Barr and support him. Jennings suggested that the endorsement leaves Daniel Cameron with little hope in the Republican primary for this seat being vacated by Mitch McConnell. Trump's intervention is being covered across the country and being seen as reshaping the race, with AOL.com noting it aims to replace McConnell with a loyalist. Jennings' assessment emphasizes that the Trump endorsement acts as a major, likely deciding factor in Kentucky Republican primary politics. The Cameron campaign was not happy about this endorsement, to say the least. Brandon Moody, a consultant for Daniel Cameron, offered a brief and pointed response, quote, "Congrats to Mitch McConnell for getting his guy," he said in the text. Moody confirmed, though, that Cameron would remain in the Republican primary race against Barr. And my, how things change. While Cameron was once considered a protege of Senator Mitch McConnell, in fact, he served as his general counsel at one time. The relationship soured simply because Cameron decided to get into this race, and McConnell did not want him in the race, and he wanted to really decide who was going to be in the race, and that's a bothersome thing, really. The other candidate, Moody's comments suggested the endorsement was driven by the establishment influence of McConnell, who's retiring, rather than a purely grassroots MAGA pick, despite Trump calling Barr, quote, a proven political winner. Now, it's interesting because in the 4th District, you have Congressman Thomas Massie, who is also a proven political winner. In fact, one could make the argument that he's had some even tougher fights because a lot of his fights have been internally. He's had to fight with his own party and folks in his own party. And yet Trump recognized Barr as a proven political winner, and both of them are. But one got his endorsement and one did not. And I think that one endorsement in one race certainly has to be considered really helpful to Congressman Barr. In the other race, I think Kentucky voters are going to show that they're independent in their thinking and in their voting, and we'll see Congressman Massie reelected probably by 7 to 8 points, maybe 10. Otherwise, it would have been 15 to 20 without Trump's involvement. So Trump's involvement makes a difference, but I just am not convinced it's going to be enough to put Ed Gallrein over the finish line. Make no mistake, though, about this. The hand of Mitch McConnell, despite his age, despite his health issues, despite the fact that he's not running again, he's still politically involved and influential. And the fact that McConnell's been in office for 41 years, is a double-edged sword. Some say, look at all he's accomplished for Kentucky. In fact, our legislative leaders like that so much, they're putting a statue up of him in the Capitol Rotunda. Others say he's been there way too long. We're going to talk more about this issue coming up in the next segment. How long is long enough? Should Congress have term limits? Is it time? And is Mitch McConnell the poster boy for that policy and that proposal? I think he is. And we'll also talk about two important constitutional amendment propositions, one at the state level and one at the federal level, right here on Kentucky's Voice. Text us at 502-571-0970 and stay with us. More to come.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
So continuing now, looking at the fallout from President Trump's endorsement of Congressman Andy Barr for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Mitch McConnell after 41 years. I mean, think about that, folks. It was 1985, the last time that there was a new senator from Kentucky. And in fact, the last time there was a Democrat, by the way, was 1994 in Wendell Ford. And so this Republican nomination is going to definitely be the heavy favorite in this race in the general election in November. And so Senator McConnell, now in his 41st year, representing Kentucky and Washington, and we have now, with Nate Morris dropping out, it becomes essentially a two-man race. Daniel Cameron today in a press conference in Louisville, and I thought that was Frankfort, but it's in Louisville, at the Republican headquarters here in Louisville, said that he is staying in this race. And not only that, he's going to do a statewide tour and announcing that as well. And so Daniel Cameron, you're going to have a Republican U.S. Senate candidate coming to a location near you over the next 2 weeks, with the primary election being exactly 2 weeks from today. But we asked both Congressman Barr and Daniel Cameron what they think of the fact that McConnell has served so long in Washington, 41 years, and what they think of his legacy. First of all, we asked them, what do they think his legacy will be? And I think these are good comments.
I think, folks will obviously point to the fact that when it came to his decision not to hear the Merrick Garland nomination and not hear that in the Senate, obviously that was a big deal because we got out of that Neil Gorsuch and a whole host of other conservative judges or justices that have allowed for a lot of good policy or case law to come out of the Supreme Court. And so I think that will be the hallmark of his legacy. And
I think Senator McConnell's greatest legacy will be a conservative Supreme Court and a conservative federal judiciary. He deserves tremendous credit for holding up the disastrous nomination of Merrick Garland, to allow President Trump to nominate Neil Gorsuch to replace, I think, the greatest associate justice in Supreme Court history, Antonin Scalia. I am a great admirer of Justice Scalia, and this president deserves enormous credit in working with Senator McConnell. Senator McConnell deserves enormous credit for working with this president. And Don McGahn, as general counsel at the time in the first term, Leonard Leo at the Federalist Society, to not only make sure that we had 3 additional originalist justices on the Supreme Court, but to populate the entire federal judiciary, hundreds of new Court of Appeals and district judges who understand that the role of the federal judiciary is to interpret the law according to the original meaning of the Constitution and according to the original meaning of the text of the statutes, not to make up the law, not to be a super legislature. So I think that's one of the greatest legacies of Mitch McConnell.
I heard both candidates here that remain the major candidates in the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate, that race, talk about Mitch McConnell's legacy in terms of the judiciary. And I think there could be wide agreement on that that's been his biggest positive contribution. I mean, folks, if you think about, and I think if you think about it, I think you'll see that, and I think it's clear. Now, but Mitch McConnell's, he's an unusual political creature in that you can really love him for one thing and really not love him at all for other decisions he's made. Certainly he has stymied some of Trump's agenda, especially in his first term, and has made some votes that Trump loudly disliked and said some pretty heated things toward McConnell. So he's that kind of political creature, if you will. Now, the question, though, is, and I think, and let me say, I think before we go on, there's a lot of people that listen to this show and view this show who have had many negative things to say about Mitch McConnell. I get it, about Senator McConnell. I get it. But some of them, but I think it's only fair to acknowledge the impact he's had in both ways, positively and negatively. So positively, we're going to say the Supreme Court is conservative, largely because of Senator McConnell's work, because he was the Senate Majority Leader during a key time when these conservative nominees were brought forth by President Trump in his first term. And Neil Gorsuch, of course, a big addition to the Supreme Court and a major move in giving the conservatives and ensuring that the conservatives had a majority on the Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court now is more conservative. The conservative majority is more conservative than it was even previously, because you had John Roberts and you had some folks who were kind of back and forth and unpredictable. But now we have a lot of more predictability with the Supreme Court justices. Now let's turn to the negative side, though, and that is discussion about Senator McConnell's age. I hear this a lot. And also not just about him, but several other longtime members of Congress that we know have stayed in office into their 80s, even as they had serious health issues. We've seen Senator McConnell freeze up at the microphone numerous times. He's had numerous falls. We've seen him in wheelchairs. We've seen him really struggling physically. I don't know that that's affected him mentally, but a lot of people say this is an indication. It's a visual. These are not good optics. Okay, certainly, and these are optics. If you support term limits, these are optics you'll point to in terms of saying, hey, we need to limit the amount of time that that representatives and senators are in Congress. So we ask the candidates as well, Congressman Andy Barr, former Attorney General Daniel Cameron, how they would respond to this issue of term limits. And let's hear those clips.
When it comes to, tenure in Washington, and we might get to this at some point, is I'm only going to serve 2 terms. I've said that pretty emphatically that, Mackenzie and I, this is a family decision that we've made. And, by the time I serve 2 terms, our oldest Theodore would be 17. His birthday's on January 2nd, and so he'll be 5 around the time that I'm sworn in, and so he would be 17 when I served 2 terms. And, you miss some things during that period of time. We have, as a family, have made a decision to do that because we know that there's going to be some good policy that is passed in Washington that's going to impact our family and help, our family just as much as the families across the Commonwealth. So we're, confident in the decision, but, 2 terms is enough. And
over and over and over again, to my great frustration, I have co-sponsored a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of Congress. I don't believe in self-term limits because you basically take out all the members of Congress who actually support term limits and you leave the people in Congress who oppose them. But to my frustration, not one time in my time in Congress has there been an actual vote on the House floor on a congressional term limit or a constitutional amendment on term limits.
And with rare exception, what's the number one goal of a politician? It's re-election, and we can see that in the lack of interest in limiting terms that a congressman or a senator can serve in Washington. Now, Daniel Cameron, after he made those comments, added that he thought that new blood is needed, new ideas, new leadership are needed, and that 2 terms for a U.S. senator is 12 years. And so think about 12 years ago is 2014. So that's the amount of time that a senator would serve in a 2-term situation. Here's also, and then you also heard Congressman Barr say that he doesn't believe in self-limitation. Now, I think this is a little squeamish for me. I think you have to do the right thing and make the right decision, no matter what the other circumstances are. But on the other hand, his idea of a constitutional amendment, I think, would be a way of getting this done because it would give politicians cover, if you will. And they're always looking for cover, where they don't have to be the only ones out there. They don't have to say, I'm going to do term limits and nobody else does. And then, then it doesn't work out for them. It doesn't benefit them. So I think having a constitutional amendment, there is some wisdom in going with that route. However, that can also be a cover for never getting it done, saying, well, I tried to get this done and we just couldn't get it done. So I think that that's why Kentucky's voice is needed, because when these candidates say things when they're running for office, and a lot of them will say this about, we need term limits. Well, when the opportunity comes up to vote for term limits, or how hard will you push on this? Will you lead, or are you just saying, if it happens, I'll support it? There's a big difference in leading on an issue in Washington and saying, well, if somebody else will lead, then I will support them. That's two different messages really there. Now, also, we've seen in the past here that congressmen have made this promise and yet they don't abide by it. And I know Daniel Cameron said he would serve 2 terms, but and I know Andy Barr says he supports term limits, but I have not really seen the evidence that incumbents who run for re-election and say, I'm for term limits, that they actually will follow through on that. It's just, I'm going to have to see it to believe it. Oh, ye of little faith when it comes to these kind of promises. But that's why Kentucky's voice is needed, so that when these promises are made, we can follow up and hold their feet to the fire. And that's why we need to hear from you. 502-571-0970. What do you think about Andy Barr's statement that he doesn't believe in self-imposed term limits, but it needs to be a constitutional amendment? And of course, Daniel Cameron saying on the record, and I said, hey, we're recording this. This is recorded. We can go back and play this. You're saying on the record that you would only serve 2 terms, and so you're limiting yourself to that. There's one other issue involved with term limits, and that is one of the challenges of term limits is the bureaucracy. Now, think about this. You have all of these agencies in Washington. You have 60,000 people alone in the Transportation Security Administration alone. That's just one government agency. And you have tens of thousands of government bureaucrats. These are people who work in these agencies. They work on regulating America. A large part of their work is in the regulatory sphere. And so when Congress passes a law, it's the bureaucracy who takes over and oftentimes regulates bills in opposition to what congressmen and senators intended. But there's really very little accountability here, because these folks are not elected. They don't have to run for election. They don't have to be accountable to the voters. So if you have term limits, you have senators and congressmen coming in who are learning the ropes. Meanwhile, you've got bureaucrats who have been entrenched there for 10, 20, 30 years, and they know how to play the game, and they're already way ahead of everybody else, and it's not always in the best interest of America. Our final segment coming up next.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Back here on Kentucky's Voice for our final segment. Thanks for staying with us today. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about term limits? What do you think about President Trump's endorsement of Congressman Andy Barr in this race? Daniel Cameron is saying he's going to stay in the race to be the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Senator Mitch McConnell after 41 years. And, you know, we were talking before the break about some of the pros and cons of term limits. And I want to restate that point and add to what we were talking about. You know, the bureaucrats, the agency heads in Washington, these folks are not elected. You never hear about them. You don't know who they are. For example, the EPA, and under Obama, it became the Expand and Extend Poverty Agency, EPA. But, you know, who was the head? Who were the folks doing it? But they have tremendous power. They have tremendous ability to affect Americans' lives by the way they implement regulations. You know, Congress can be well-intentioned in a bill that they pass, and once the bureaucracy gets a hold of it, it can become a whole different thing and become a burden to Americans, whereas Congress may have been intending for it to be good for Americans. And so you have these lifers. Many of them are lifers. They've spent their whole career on the government dole, in the agency, in the bureaucracy. So here you have these people who are entrenched, and they know how everything works. They know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak. They know how to get things done quickly because they've been there so long. And then if you have a whole batch of new congressmen or new senators coming into office, and it really takes them a year, is what they've told me, to find out really everything happening to the point that they can be effective in representing their people. And so, you know, new congressmen, new senators, they don't, you know, they can't hold this agency accountable until they're really prepared to do so. And and in the meantime, the bureaucracy is taking advantage of new representatives, new lawmakers who have to climb that learning curve before they can say, hey, this is, we got to hold the agencies accountable. So we do need people who can hit the ground running. At the same time, we need people who come in with fresh ideas and fresh blood. So there are issues like that involved, and I think it's important to recognize that and to find people who are competent enough to hit the ground running. Now, I think either one of these candidates, and the major candidates, Congressman Andy Barr, former Attorney General Daniel Cameron, would do a great job, would hit the ground running from the beginning. Obviously, Congressman Barr has been in Washington for a while, and that's a negative to many voters. So we'll see how it all turns out. In the meantime, as we said, Senator Mitch McConnell has not only been a topic of discussion in this race, but he was also a topic of discussion during the General Assembly session, where this year the Kentucky General Assembly voted in early April to approve a provision in House Bill 757. This was one of those revenue tax bills that they tack on additional things like reserving space in the new state capitol rotunda for a statue of longtime U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, right, who's retiring, as we said, this year. He is not running for re-election. And so the General Assembly does sometimes what some people say it does best, and that is tack on something to a bill when nobody's really maybe paying attention to it. And by the time people figure out it's there, it's already down the road. Now, this what the legislative leaders, and they're the ones that really determine kind of how legislation flows in Frankfort. Senate President Robert Stivers, House Speaker David Osborne, and there's a leadership team there. And you have, of course, David Meade, who's the House Speaker pro tem. You have David Givens in the Senate, who is number 2 there in the state Senate. And so they get together with their leadership and they decide these things. And they decided that they would pass legislation that would create or would actually, the word is really reserve space in the new state capitol rotunda for a statue of longtime Senator McConnell. Now, The statue itself has to be privately funded. There must be no state tax dollars used for this. We're certainly going to be paying attention to that. And what it is this space would occupy the spot left empty after the removal of a Jefferson Davis statue in 2020. And of course, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, also a Kentucky native, just like the president of the Union, Abraham Lincoln, was. But they removed his statue in 2020. And lawmakers in this bill this year added language directing the state curator and the Historic Properties Advisory Commission to accept and display a statue of Senator McConnell once it's funded. They had to do that because he's not universally liked here. He's not popular. He's not universally popular. But the legislative leaders defended their decision to reserve a space for Senator McConnell in the rotunda by talking about two things: his longevity. He's the longest serving senator in Kentucky's history. Again, elected in 1984, took office in 1985, as we said, served 7 terms. Senate President Robert Stivers highlighted that, quote, there's been nobody in our history that has been in the position of authority as Senator McConnell has, and, quote, that he has, quote, elevated the status of Kentucky. Democrats, of course, criticized the move, which, by the way, McConnell responded that he was honored and humbled and grateful to the General Assembly. But Democratic Governor Andy Beshear line item vetoed that provision in that revenue bill, which he can do in revenue bills. He can veto a line item. Democrats criticized, Beshear argued, and I'm going to say this, I think this is one place, at least part of what Beshear said in his veto message, that I actually agree with the governor on. Beshear argued against honoring a living person with a statue. I don't believe that we've ever done that. He noted that he also noted the legislature's refusal to honor certain other figures like General Charles Young, who was a trailblazing black U.S. Army officer born to enslaved parents in Kentucky. And he was posthumously promoted to honorary brigadier general in 2020 by Beshear. And then Beshear had to go on with his partisan political stuff, and I'm not going to get into all that right now because I don't have time. But in short, the Republican majority passed it as a fitting, low-cost honor for McConnell's career and service to the state, capitalizing on the open rotunda spot during Capitol renovation. So right now, the Capitol is being renovated, and the timing of this was such that they said that it would be the right time to reserve a space in the rotundas and when a statue is privately funded, to put that in there. It will be interesting to see if it is privately funded and who will fund it. I predict it will be funded, but I wonder if we'll know who funded it and how that all comes about. But I do agree with the governor. I don't think it's appropriate for a statue to be placed in the rotunda while a person is living. I think that needs to be reserved strictly for folks who have served, passed on, passed away, and that's a way of remembering their contribution. There can be no doubt that Senator McConnell's contribution to the politics of Kentucky has been enormous. When Senator Mitch McConnell took office in 1985, he was elected in November 1984. He defeated a Democratic incumbent by calling out that incumbent, Dee Huddleston, for not voting, for not showing up to vote. And that's how he won office. Well, since he has been in office, there's been a big change in Kentucky's political makeup. There was no way when Senator Mitch McConnell took office that this was a red state. No way, no how. It was a blue state. It was not a purple state. It was a blue state. In fact, in counties like Warren County, which is, I mean, for as long as most of people even my age or even, of course, younger, they've known that as a conservative county. But it wasn't that way. And it wasn't all that long ago that it wasn't that way. If you wanted to participate in the politics of Warren County, for example, 20 years ago, you had to be a Democrat. 25 years ago, even 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, Democrats still held the advantage when it came to registrations in our state. What does that mean? It means there were more Democrats than Republicans who had registered. And if you go to register to vote, most of the time those folks are going to be the ones who are going to be serious about their politics. When Mitch McConnell took office, it was 4 Democrats for every 1 Republican. 1 Republican every 4 Democrats. That was statewide. In Jefferson County, where McConnell ran from, it was about 7-1. And so for Mitch McConnell to even have won office, he had to get lots of votes from Democrats, perhaps a majority. Now, he went to work, and one of his main primary goals was to change the registration of the state and make it a Republican state. Now, we can argue all day long about some of his votes on Trump's agenda, some of the things he said about Trump, some of the things he did during the Obama administration. I think all of those things are fair game. They should be debated. They should be fully vetted. But there can be no arguing with the facts. And the facts are that when Mitch McConnell took office, this was a blue state, not purple, not even close to being red. This was a blue state. This state was as blue as California in some ways, or at least as Illinois or some of these other blue states in our region. And now it's not a purple state. It's not a blue state. It is a blood red state. It is a Trump red state. In fact, this state is so red that Donald Trump got a higher percentage of the votes here. He won by 30 points here. Only Indiana came close. Only Indiana and Kentucky were the closest here in this region, in a state that used to be, and by the way, Southern Indiana used to be represented by a Democrat in that district. Now it's as red as you can get. Say Democrat there and run, because you better run, because you might be in trouble. But that's what we've got here in Kentucky. So the impact of Mitch McConnell on the politics of Kentucky is not debatable. It's been huge. Now, whether you agree with some of his votes and some of his ideas and some of his comments, that's not what I'm not saying those are clear, and I'm not saying we agree. But I'm saying his influence, his impact is unmistakable. And any politically intelligent person has to acknowledge that, while at the same time acknowledging that he was a very controversial figure, a very divisive figure. Thanks for joining us today on Kentucky's Voice. Have a great day, everyone. Be back here tomorrow at 11. We'll see you.